as sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of the chapel, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the polished wooden pews. Darius Coleman stood at the altar, his hands trembling not from nerves, but from the weight of what he was about to unleash. From the back row, Olivia Harper's relatives whispered and snickered, their voices carrying just enough to sting. One uncle, his voice sharp and smug, leaned toward a cousin and muttered, "A mechanic? That's who she's marrying? Talk about scraping the bottom of the barrel." The cruel laughter that followed sliced through the air, and Darius heard every word. He stood tall, his face composed, but inside, a fire was building. What he was about to reveal during his vows would not just silence the room, it would shatter their world. Darius Coleman was a man who wore his work like a badge of honor. He owned a small but thriving auto repair shop in the heart of his hometown, where the scent of oil and metal was as familiar as his own heartbeat. He could diagnose a slipping transmission or a faulty fuel pump with the same ease most people check their email. Raised by his single mother, Gloria, who juggled waitressing by day and cleaning offices by night, Darius grew up in a home where love and grit were the currency, not cash. Every wrench in his toolbox, every grease-stained rag, carried a story of sacrifice and survival. Gloria's words were his North Star. Be a man whose word is worth more than his wallet, Darius. He lived by that creed, building a life of quiet pride, not flash. His shop, Coleman's Auto, was a testament to his skill and hustle, a place where customers didn't just get their cars fixed, but left with a story about the mechanic who treated their beat-up sedan like it was a Rolls-Royce. It was a humid Tuesday afternoon when Olivia Harper strode into his shop, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete floor. She clutched her keys like they might betray her, her sleek Mercedes coughing from a busted radiator. Everything about her screamed privileged designer handbag, oversized sunglasses, a crisp tone that suggested she wasn't used to waiting. Darius wasn't fazed. He explained the issue with the calm precision of an artist describing a canvas, and something about his quiet confidence caught her off guard. She stayed, lingering in the waiting area, asking questions about the repair process. He answered, not with bravado, but with a depth that made her lean in. Days later, she returned not for car trouble, but with 2 coffees and a smile that said she wasn't going anywhere. What started as a chance encounter bloomed into a love that neither of them expected, least of all Olivia, whose world of gala dinners and Ivy League connections couldn't have been further from Darius's grease-stained reality. Olivia's family, the Harpers, were old money, a dynasty of lawyers, financiers, and corporate titans who measured worth by pedigrees and portfolios. To them, manual labor was something other people did, preferably out of sight. When Olivia first brought Darius to meet them at their sprawling estate, the air turned frigid. Her father, William Harper, extended a handshake so stiff it felt like a formality for someone contagious. Her mother, Eleanor Harper, offered a smile that never reached her eyes. Her older brother, Nathan Harper, didn't bother hiding his contempt, leaning in to whisper loudly enough for Darius to hear. "So, he fixes cars for a living? That's quaint." The dinner that followed was a gauntlet of veiled insults and probing questions, each one designed to remind Darius he didn't belong. "What's the long-term plan for a mechanic?" William asked, slicing his steak with surgical precision. "Surely you don't intend to stay in that trade forever?" Darius didn't flinch. He'd learned early that some people mistook status for substance, and he wasn't about to justify his life to those who'd already written him off. He stayed polite, his answers measured, enduring their scrutiny for Olivia's sake. She loved him fiercely, and that was enough. But as their relationship deepened, so did the Harpers' disapproval. Every family gathering became a stage for their disdain. At a cocktail party, Nathan smirked over his martini, joking that Darius could tune up the family jet if he ever got bored with oil changes. Eleanor, during a holiday brunch, mused aloud about Olivia's ex, a Yale-educated hedge fund manager, as if Darius weren't sitting across from her. Olivia pushed back, her voice sharp, calling out their snobbery, but it took a toll. She'd come home from those dinners quiet, her eyes heavy with the weight of defending the man she loved against people who were supposed to love her. Darius saw it, felt it, and though he said little, he was watching, listening, storing every slight like kindling for a fire he was building in secret. The Harpers thought they knew Hima's small-town mechanic with dirty hands and no ambition. They were wrong. Darius wasn't just fixing cars. He was crafting a legacy, and on his wedding day, they'd learned just how wrong they'd been. The engagement party at the Harpers' mansion was a spectacle of wealth, marble floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers, waitstaff gliding like ghosts, the air thick with the scent of orchids and entitlement. Darius stood on the manicured lawn, dressed in a navy blazer Olivia had chosen, his calloused hands betraying his discomfort. He smiled when expected, but his eyes scanned the crowd, not for danger but for dignity, which seemed to slip away with every whispered jab. A woman in a pearl necklace swirled her champagne, murmuring to her friend, "Does he even know which fork to use?" Their giggles were like needles. Later, at dinner, Olivia's cousin Lucas Harper, a smug investment banker whose hands looked like they'd never touched anything rougher than a golf club, raised a glass. "To Darius," he said, grinning. "Our roadside assistance for the honeymoon." The table erupted in laughter, sharp and mean. Olivia stiffened beside him, her voice cutting through. "That's not funny, Lucas." He shrugged, palms up. "Just a joke, Liv. Relax." Darius didn't react, didn't blink. He reached for his water, his face a mask of calm, but inside, he was cataloging every word, every smirk. This wasn't weakness, it was strategy. He was letting them dig their own graves. The insults didn't stop there. At a florist appointment, Olivia's Aunt Clara Harper tilted her head, voice dripping with faux sweetness. "How are you two covering these costs, dear? The lilies alone cost more than a used car." At a cake tasting, Eleanor sighed. "I hope Darius understands marriage is more than swapping out spark plugs." Each jab was a spark, and Darius's silence was the fuel. Olivia fought back, calling out their condescension, but the Harpers brushed her off with patronizing smiles. "We're just looking out for you, darling," they'd say, or, "You deserve someone on your level." What they meant was someone with their money, their upbringing, not a man whose hands bore the scars of honest work. The breaking point came at a pre-wedding brunch at an exclusive country club, where the napkins probably cost more than Darius's boots. As he reached for a mimosa, he overheard an uncle mutter, "If this marriage flops, at least Olivia will know how to change a tire." Darius smiled not because it was funny, but because he was ready. He'd been quiet long enough, and the stage was set for a reckoning that would leave them speechless. The rehearsal dinner was held at the majestic Grand Hotel, a five-star monument to excess with mahogany-paneled walls, French chandeliers, and service so seamless it felt like a performance. The Harpers had spared no expense, not out of generosity, but as a flex of final attempt to show Olivia what she was giving up by choosing Darius. He sat at the long, candlelit table, dressed in a charcoal suit that hugged his frame with quiet elegance, Olivia's hand clasped tightly in his under the tablecloth. The meal was a parade of decadence: foie gras, seared scallops, desserts that looked like sculptures, but the real spectacle was in the eyes of the Harpers. Every glance was a judgment, every forced smile a reminder that they still saw Darius as an outsider, a mistake Olivia would regret. The toasts were hollow, laced with subtext, and the laughter was sharp, like glass. As dessert plates were cleared, Darius stood, the soft scrape of his chair pulling every eye to him. He lifted his glass, not with the stiffness of someone trying to fit in, but with the ease of a man who'd already won. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice warm but steady, cutting through the room's low hum. "It's tradition for the groom to speak the night before the wedding, so here I am." The room hushed, some guests rolling their eyes, expecting a clumsy speech from the grease monkey. Darius's gaze swept the table, lingering on William, then Nathan. "I want to thank Olivia's parents for hosting this dinner, for welcoming me into your world, even if it's been challenging." Nervous chuckles rippled through the room. Nathan smirked into his wine. Olivia squeezed Darius's hand, her knuckles pale. "Before we move to tomorrow," Darius continued, pacing slowly behind his chair, "I thought I'd share something." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded document and placing it on the table with deliberate care. Curious heads leaned forward. "Some of you know me as a mechanic." "That's true. I've built my shop, Coleman's Auto, from a single bay to what it is today, and I'm proud of that." A few guests shifted, uncomfortable with his unapologetic pride. But what you don't know, he said, his voice sharpening, is that last week, I signed a statewide franchise deal. Coleman's Auto will expand to 42 locations across 4 states in the next 2 years. I also closed a partnership with a national auto parts chain, with an equity stake that's made me a millionaire overnight. The room froze. A fork clinked against a plate. Nathan nearly choked, his wine glass trembling. Eleanor's lips parted, her eyes wide with shock. William's jaw tightened, then slackened, his face a mask of disbelief. Darius let the silence stretch, his gaze unflinching. I didn't share this before because I don't believe money defines a man. I still don't. But I've learned that in some rooms, it's the only language you understand. The words landed like a slap. I've been laughed at behind your napkins, judged in your whispers, treated like a footnote in my own love story. But here's the truth. This story doesn't need your approval to be extraordinary. He raised his glass, locking eyes with William. To family by blood or choice. May we learn that worth isn't in bank accounts or dinner jackets, but in character. Olivia stood, her glass raised, her voice steady. To love. To truth, Darius added. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy, as if the room was recalibrating. Some guests clapped hesitantly, others stared at their plates, shame creeping into their expressions. Nathan looked like he'd been doused in ice water. Eleanor sipped her wine, her eyes trembling. William sat stone-faced, gripping the table's edge, his pride sinking like a ship. Darius sat, his hand finding Olivia's, and she whispered, "That was perfect." He didn't reply, but his grip tightened. Tonight was about truth, tomorrow would be about love. The wedding day dawned, and the chapel buzzed with anticipation, though the Harpers' earlier mockery still hung in the air like smoke. As Darius stood at the altar, his tailored tuxedo sharp against the soft glow of the chapel, he felt the weight of every insult, every smirk, fueling his resolve. Olivia walked down the aisle, radiant, her eyes locked on his, oblivious to the whispers from her family's pews. The ceremony unfolded smoothly, but the real moment came during the vows. Darius took Olivia's hands, his voice steady but charged with purpose. "Olivia, you saw me when others didn't. You loved me for who I am, not what I have. And today, I promise you a life built on truth, not promises." He paused, reaching into his pocket for a small velvet box. The congregation leaned forward, expecting a ring or necklace. Instead, Darius opened it to reveal a folded document, tied with a ribbon. He held it up, his eyes finding William's in the front row. "This," he said, his voice carrying through the chapel, "is the deed to our first home. Paid in full, in your name, Olivia, for our future." A gasp rippled through the room. Olivia covered her mouth, tears spilling, not from the gift, but from the fire in Darius's eyes. He turned to the Harpers, his tone calm, but piercing. "I didn't come here to impress you. I came to love your daughter. But since my worth seems to be your obsession, know this. We're not starting with dream soiree, starting with foundations." William's face drained of color, his mouth opening, but no words coming. Eleanor looked away, blinking furiously, her composure crumbling. Nathan dropped his program, his smirk gone. The rest of the room erupted. Olivia's college friends, her old professors, even distant cousins who'd barely spoken to Darius stood, clapping, their applause swelling into a roar. It wasn't just for the deed, but for the man who'd faced a room of skeptics and emerged taller than them all. The Harpers stayed seated, their silence brittle, their pride shattered. Darius handed Olivia the box, kneeling briefly. "For us," he said softly, "so no one can say they gave us anything we didn't earn." She threw her arms around him, whispering, "I never needed them. I only needed you." In that moment, surrounded by cheers in a room once thick with judgment, they were untouchable. Months later, the wedding photos had faded from social media, but Darius and Olivia were building something far greater. In a gritty corner of their city's west side, an old warehouse hummed with life. The sign outside read Coleman Harper Community Garage, powered by knowledge, driven by purpose. It wasn't just a repair shop, it was a sanctuary, a classroom, a beacon. Darius, in his grease-stained jumpsuit, taught groups of teens, mostly black boys from tough neighborhoods, how to rebuild engines and, more importantly, themselves. The world will laugh at you, he'd tell them, his voice steady as he stood before a row of eager faces. They'll judge your clothes, your hands, your dreams. But respect? You don't beg for it. You carry it, and one day, they'll have no choice but to see you. Olivia was there too, not just as his wife, but his partner in mission. She handled grants, outreach, and scholarships, pouring her inheritance into the program's first year. When someone asked if she regretted leaving her privileged life, she laughed. I didn't leave anything. I chose purpose over comfort. Their work drew attention, not for the wedding drama, but for its impact. Local papers ran stories on the Coleman Harper model, a blueprint for community empowerment. People who'd once scoffed at Darius now sent their kids to his program. One afternoon, a news crew arrived for an interview. The reporter, standing amid the clang of tools and laughter, asked Darius, "Looking back to that wedding, when they judged you, dismissed you, what would you say to them now?" Darius wiped his hands on a rag, his gaze calm but piercing. "Nothing. Our life, our work says it all." Behind him, a teen shouted in triumph, having fixed a brake line for the first time, his grin brighter than any trophy. The crew turned their cameras, capturing the moment, and it was clear, Darius didn't need the Harper's approval. He never had. His vision, his integrity, his legacy were louder than their whispers ever could be. He hadn't just built a business or a home, he had built a table, and those who'd mocked him were now clamoring for a seat.